All right, welcome to Module 10. Our subject is the media, which is often described as a singular entity, but in fact consists of dozens of privately owned, corporately managed, and publicly traded businesses whose primary motive is to make profits. I actually teach a semester-long course entitled Media and Politics, so this is a topic I find very interesting. I enjoy teaching that class quite a bit. I strongly believe that as a country we need to be able to agree on certain basic facts. And one of the biggest challenges we confront is that the media today is split between news outlets seeking to attract a conservative audience, call it Fox World, if you will, and those news outlets, seeking to attract a liberal audience, call it MSNBC World. And never the twain shall meet. And because of that division, Americans can't agree on basic issues. Because you have cable news outlets whose business model consists of making their target audience mad at other Americans. As an example, most of the cable news outlets and major networks televised the first January 6th Commission hearing. Fox News made the decision to not preempt their existing program, but rather had their main nighttime anchors on criticizing the hearings, with Sean Hannity dismissing the hearings as a multi-hour Democratic fundraiser. So, I'll leave that where it is. One of the key elements of the First Amendment is the guarantee of freedom of the press. Now, what does that mean? What did the framers mean by that phrase? Originally, I think there's good reason to believe that the drafters of the First Amendment meant that freedom of the press implied that the government should not monopolize on the ownership of printing presses, which is how pamphlets and newspapers of the day were produced. Over time, freedom of the press has meant the right, evolved to mean the right to independently produce news without fear of what is known as prior restraint, which is a legal term for censorship. Because of the First Amendment's freedom of the press clause, the American media, especially the print media, operate independently of the government with little in the way of overt intrusion into decisions on what to publish. This follows the thinking of the British 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill, whose book On Liberty, which was published in 1859, argued that the use of the government to suppress freedom of the speech was a bad idea. For Mill and subsequently for most Americans, the remedy to offensive speech is corrective speech, to show people the error of their ways, not by telling them to shut up. The Supreme Court precedent on censorship was reinforced in 1971 with its decision in New York Times versus United States. A 6-3 per curiam decision, and per curiam, simply we'll learn more about this in a later module, but it's Latin for by the court, which means the court is speaking with one voice and there's not a majority decision. But that decision held that the New York Times and Washington Post could not be prevented by the government from publishing what was a pessimistic Defense Department report on the U.S. prospects for victory in the Vietnam War. And basically the court was holding that the public had a right to know how the war was progressing, and the Nixon administration did not have a right to prevent the public from learning about it. So, ultimately that highlights the importance of the idea of freedom of the press, which of course was actually reinforced in the 1930s in a case called Neer versus Minnesota. The importance of the media is often illustrated in how it's described. For example, the assigned reading cites the British parliamentarian and philosopher Edmund Burke, who described journalists as the fourth estate, with the first three being the clergy, nobility, and the people. That follows how the French viewed, these sort of different separate worlds. Likewise, Douglas Cater wrote a really interesting book called The Fourth Branch of Government, and in it he offered this view of the political nature of journalists. The reporter is the recorder of government, but he is also a participant. He operates in a system in which power is divided. He, as much as anyone, helps to shape the course of government. He is the indispensable broker and middleman among subgovernments of Washington. He can illuminate policy and nobly assist in giving it sharpness and clarity. Just as easily, he can prematurely expose policy, and, as with undeveloped film, cause its destruction. At his worst, operating with arbitrary and faulty standards, he can be an agent of disorder and confusion. At his best, he can exert creative influence on Washington politics. From this view of journalism, we get the sense in which an important aspect of journalism is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. An example of journalism holding the powerful accountable is the Washington Post journalistic team of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, whose reporting on the break-in of the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate Hotel sparked a major controversy that ultimately resulted in the resignation of then-President Richard Nixon. I would also note that the Washington Post recently published a story by Woodward and Bernstein on June 5th of this year, comparing Donald Trump to Richard Nixon, arguing that Trump's sins were even greater than Nixon's, that they amounted to something that was worse than Watergate. They write, both Nixon and Trump have been willing prisoners of their compulsions to dominate and to gain and hold power through virtually any means. In leaning so heavily on these dark impulses, they defined two of the most dangerous and troubling eras in American history. The aside reading offers a useful distinction between traditional and new media. Traditional media refers to newspapers, radio, television. New media consists primarily of internet-based platforms, online magazines, podcasts, social media sites like Facebook, etc. The assigned reading looks at the relationship between the media and government by describing the different roles of the media in the governing process, which again include that notion that I was talking about in previous modules on interest groups and parties, that as a linkage institution. This is a sense in which, again, the media acts to help connect individuals to government, get them information, help them understand what's going on. A provider of political information, which is a second point. The media are the principal source of information for citizens. We can't all travel to Washington, D.C. and see what's going on, or we can't travel to Oklahoma City. As I noted above, increasingly Americans are drawing their information from partisan sources, which means that liberal and conservative Americans have increasingly and fundamentally different interpretations of facts. Three, the media can act as a government watchdog. As noted above with Watergate, the media can provide objective reporting on government scandals and wrongdoings that can lead to accountability. Fourth, the media is an influencer of the public agenda. The media can't tell us what to think, but they have the ability to influence what we think about and how we think about it. They achieve this agenda-setting function through what is known as framing, which refers to how the media emphasize certain aspects of a story, and also through priming, which means the use of earlier stories to influence an audience's interpretation of events and issues. Like I mentioned just a little while ago, the more recent story by Woodward and Bernstein puts Trump in a different comparative light, and certainly in an unflattering one. The media acts as a forum for political conversations. Part of the media's job is to explain complex issues to the American public. The January 6th committee's public hearing on the Capitol riots are a good illustration of how the media can help political actors explain the significance of an event and what should be done about it. A lot of Republicans, Mike Pence, for example, the vice president at the time, they threatened, the rioters threatened to kill him. He basically is saying, we shouldn't be looking backward, we should be looking forward. And politically, I think that's actually probably correct. But I also think there's a political sense in which if we are not holding people accountable for crimes, yes, I get it. It's politics. You want to move on. But do you feel that way about crimes? Oh, well, let's move on. That's what the criminals want. Oh, we shouldn't be thinking about this, right? We should be moving on. Well, I think we should have accountability. I think some people should be should be held to account for what happened. Sixth, the media serve as agents of political socialization. As children, we grow up watching programs like Sesame Street or NBC's News for Kids that begin the process of teaching children about the importance of government and politics. The problem with such programming is its tendency to prioritize entertaining rather than informing, and that can carry over into adulthood. And social scientists have coined the term infotainment to capture that mingling of entertainment and the news. And again, the problem is, if you mingle your entertainment with your information, all too often you find yourself, simply engaging in cognitive dissonance, which is this idea that I'm just going to filter out the stuff that I don't want to learn about. I'm just not going to learn about it. And that has been reinforced by the rise of cable news programs like Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. When Ted Turner created CNN in 1980, he stated that was the first cable news network. He stated that he hoped CNN's national and international coverage would bring together in brotherhood and kindness and friendship and in peace the people of this nation and this world. It hasn't turned out that way. The creation of Fox News in 1996 by Rupert Murdoch as an expressly conservative cable news show reflected the increasingly ideological divide in the country. As I mentioned above, liberals and conservatives occupy different worlds and have little patience for disagreement with their ideological, with anyone who disagrees with their ideological perspective. Today, there are several challenges confronting the media. You've had the death of certain media forms, and this is especially true of small local papers, many of whom have been bought by large corporate newspaper chains whose demands for profits basically have led to the cannibalization of local news reporting staffs. Second challenge is that the media are very afraid of becoming part of the story. And over the course of the Trump administration, of course, Trump spent a lot of time excoriating news networks, calling them the enemy of the people. He once kicked CNN's White House correspondent Jim Acosta out of the White House, press staff. Claims of liberal or conservative media bias lead to questions regarding the media's capacity for objectivity. 3, questionable news stories and even outright lies can spread more quickly today through social media platforms. Erroneous stories can quickly go viral in this age of social media, leading some social media platforms to begin aggressively policing their sites, including punishments like suspensions and what we now know as deplatforming people who routinely threaten others or push fake news. Americans tend to view media corporations as standing outside politics. In my view, that's a blind spot of sorts. Journalists are certainly political actors, and media corporations and conglomerates are clearly political institutions, private institutions, but nevertheless political, and similar in that sense to both political parties and interest groups. The relationship between the media and politicians is one of mutual need and mutual mistrust. Both parties have something the other need. Journalists have an audience, and politicians have newsworthy information. The primary source of mistrust is that the media and politicians' objectives are often at cross purposes. After all, I noted that watchdog role of the media is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Politicians are aware of that, and they're aware that they can be a target. In recent years, the relationship between the media and government officials has deteriorated significantly to the point where former President Donald Trump frequently referred to reporters as the enemy of the people and basically pointed, huge mobs at the direction of journalists. That hostility has affected the way millions of Americans consume news, with too many Americans rejecting what they call the lamestream media in favor of more overtly propagandistic outlets like Newsmax, which is another factor feeding partisan polarization among Americans. Political actors often try to manipulate the media through a variety of means. This is a normal part of the political process, with political actors seeking to get the media outlets to uncritically accept their view of issues and events. Journalists, in turn, want to maintain good relations with politicians, but they don't want to get the reputation of being a flack, right? Someone who promotes a particular politician or a particular party's political perspective. Then there are leaks, which refer to the release of confidential information, usually by a government official. So why would a government official leak important information? Think about the leak of Associate Justice Samuel Alito's majority opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which probably will have been formally announced by the time the class sees this video. Why was the draft leaked? It depends on who did the leaking, right? On the one hand, it might have been one of the liberal justices or their clerks. In that case, the motivation would have been to mobilize public opinion in opposition to Alito's decision striking down Roe. On the other hand, it might have been Alito or another conservative justice or one of their clerks. In that instance, the motivation would have been to harden the opinions of the other justices in support of Alito's decision. Rumors have been swirling that Chief Justice Roberts was seeking to peel off one or more of the 3 Trump-appointed justices, especially Justice Kavanaugh, to water down the Alito opinion. Once it was leaked, everyone would know, once the opinion was released, that there had been, political revisions, and that would spark, fury among the pro-life folks. So in any event, the media love leaks and are happy to have people in government seeking to manipulate them with leaks. I want to conclude by briefly noting factors that have, precipitated the decline in trust in America, or the decline in trust in the media. Today, only about 9% of the public expresses a great deal of confidence that journalists act in the best interest of the public, and only 6% express a great deal of confidence in the news. So what are some factors that contribute to that erosion of trust? One is the weakening of the political party's capacity to govern. One political scientist, Shanto Iyengar, has basically argued that the media has been thrust into the role that the political parties had previously played, and the media can't fulfill that role. Number 2, you've got the rise of cable news and an increasingly partisan media. And 3, the subsequent erosion of journalistic standards of objectivity in the face of a decades-long campaign by conservatives accusing the media of, liberal bias. Obviously, there's a lot more to discuss about the media, and if anyone is interested in this subject and in the role in the governing process that interests you that I haven't discussed, please feel free to ask a question in the discussion. Particularly if there's anything that you're having trouble understanding, please let me know, and I will try to clear things up. Let's have a great discussion.